Hello, everyone. Welcome back to the Running Through It Podcast YouTube page. I am Justin Horniger, and I'm the host of the Running Through It Podcast. Let's get into my interview with Brady Holmer, who is a doctoral candidate at the University of Florida. You all know me. I'm a sciencey type of guy. I like to talk about running physiology, things like that. But my undergrad is nowhere near the knowledge base that Brady has, who's in his 5th year of his doctorate in how sleep impacts performance, things like that. Brady's wonderful guy for coming on and talking to me. He knows a lot about physiology, so it was great to kind of have these conversations based around common misconceptions that we have about running and about how the science works, things like that. So super grateful to have Brady. Hopefully you all enjoy this interview. Before we get there, make sure that you like and subscribe this video. If you like what you see here, I have the full unedited version of the interview on the podcast, just a couple extra minutes, as well as my reaction to last weekend's Music City Distance Carnival. Track is back, baby. As well as my reaction to Joshua Cheptegei's 5,000 meter world record. You can check that out. I'll have the Spotify link down below in the show notes. Again, subscribe for more videos like this. I'm going to start this as a new format for the YouTube channel, along with my quick reactions, just to get a little more content out there to you guys. So hope you enjoy, and we'll be back. All right, everyone. Welcome back to Running Through Your Podcast. I have with me Brady Holmer today. Brady, what's going on?
Not much, Justin. Just kind of having a relaxing morning, hopping on the podcast with you, and then probably gonna get to work on some stuff later today. But I'm doing well. Thanks for having me on.
How's the old? Are you still working on your doctorate, or what's kind of going on there?
I am, yes. So I will be entering. I'll be going into my 5th year of the PhD program. It was funny. I did a podcast with somebody the other day, and I told them in my bio, I said that I was a 4th year PhD student, and then I'm like, oh wait, I'm a 5th year. So time's just flying by. But yeah, I'm currently working on my PhD. I'll be hopefully starting my dissertation project. Knock on wood, this semester. Coronavirus has delayed things a little bit, but we're going to hope to get that started. And, then once that gets started, hopefully I'll be out of here in not too long.
Nice. What, if you don't mind me asking, what exactly is your dissertation on?
Yeah, I am, I'm getting a PhD in applied physiology. So that's kind of my area of study. And then even more specifically, cardiovascular physiology. And then if you want to know what the specific project is, I guess, I'm going to be looking at the effects of sleep deprivation on blood vessel function. So that was kind of a topic that has recently gained my interest in the past year or so, and we decided to turn it into a research study, and I'll be writing up my dissertation on that. So very excited.
Real world applications too. That's nice.
Yeah, for sure. That's something that I've kind of grown to love about physiology. So I like basic science, and I like basic biology and learning all the molecular, cellular kind of stuff. Yeah. But I mean, really what I've grown to love more is sort of the applied side of physiology, where I can actually, do a study that has some sort of real world application. Not that all science doesn't, if you're not doing it in humans. I mean, all science is relevant, but doing something like this where I can directly kind of, people are going to be interested in it. Everybody at some point is a little bit sleep deprived or sleep, everybody sleeps. So it's this
right now
this study, hopefully. Yeah, for sure. Some sleep more, some are sleeping more during quarantine, some less, but yeah, just, it has real world application, and I love doing those types of studies.
Nice. Yeah. And that's why I wanted to have you on, because there's a lot of, I have a science background. I only have a bachelor's, but I majored in kinesiology actually. So it drives me crazy sometimes when I see people in the running community, coaches, just totally misusing terms that they think sound sciencey.
Happens a lot.
I'm sure that drives you insane too. So I wanted to talk a little bit today about misconceptions in coaching, in running, of running terms. To me, the one that drives me crazy is when people talk about lactic acid. That just for whatever reason, it's my
man. Yeah, for sure. It's it's very misunderstood, and probably you, I mean, I believe when I got my undergrad, I mean, I have my undergrad in exercise science as well, but it was kind of being taught, you get taught in general that lactic acid is this metabolic poison that builds up when you're doing high intensity exercise. I mean, we're not going to get into the whole glycolysis, on this podcast, because that would take a couple hours, but you go through the process of breaking down glucose into ATP, and it gets to this final step where lactate is produced, and then we're learning like, okay, so in the absence of oxygen, which truly another kind of misconception that I won't get sidetracked on, but like, this concept that we have anaerobic exercise and then we have aerobic exercise, and like, well, really we're always using oxygen. What differentiates aerobic from anaerobic is whether the oxygen that we're using is sufficient to provide the energy that we need to create ATP. So there's sort of like, you can think of it as like this threshold, I guess. So like, up to a certain intensity, all of our energetic needs are being met by consuming oxygen, because we're able to, the rate at which we need to produce energy can be met by, oxidative phosphorylation, and then mitochondrial respiration with oxygen. But then, when we get to higher intensities, the energetic needs go up so much that we have to create it without oxygen, so that's kind of where the lactate thing comes up. It's like, oh, we don't have oxygen, then lactate gets, it goes into lactic acid, and that's kind of what like poisons our muscles and causes that burning and causes them to get sore. And when you really, and that's what I learned in undergrad, and had been taught kind of all my life, I'm sure you ran in high school and things like that, cross country, track. So, your coaches are always telling you like drain the lactic acid out. Like, you put your legs up on the wall and so the lactic acid can drain. And like,
that's why we cool down. Yeah,
exactly. Right. And it's like, it makes sense, but then, the more you learn about it, it really doesn't. And like, so it's just like, we can use lactic acid as a fuel. And so that's just something that I've learned, I'm by no means an expert in like, lactate, the physiology of lactate and how our body can use it. But, we are able to use it as a fuel. So during exercise, our body uses something called the Cori cycle, and it shuttles lactate from where it's being produced in the muscles, shuttles it all around the body. And we can kind of, I don't want to say recycle, because that's probably not a physiological term, but we can use that lactate as a fuel, just like anything else, which is pretty interesting. And so, when you think about it like that, lactate isn't necessarily like this thing that's causing the soreness. There's plenty of other things causing the soreness. And what's really causing the burning sensation is just this buildup of hydrogen ions, which are associated with lactate production. But that's really what's causing this acidic environment. And I speak of acidity in terms of like the pH of our blood. So it's really actually like causing your blood to become more acidic. And that's why we're getting that burning, along with the buildup of carbon dioxide and things like that. So, I think it's just fun to think. It's fun, and it makes sense as runners, like I said before, to kind of think about lactate in that terms, because it's like, oh yeah, this nasty crap is building up in our legs when we're running. And if we do a cool down to get the blood circulating, and we put our legs up on the wall and we get a massage, to flush out that lactate, that's going to cause us to be less sore, which isn't really what happens. Something that I did learn, a couple years ago, or that I heard, was like, I think within, maybe 2 to 3 minutes of stopping exercise, all of the lactate in your muscles is going to be either used up or just kind of circulated out. So, again, when it's like, if you're sore a day after, it's not because of lactic acid. That's for sure.
Yeah. That's the reason why I work out those paces, because it's a less efficient fuel to use and there's less of it. So that's why you need to do more workouts per se. And that's just teaching our body to be more efficient in that way.
For sure.
It's interesting because it's like, I think we always want to put things in more like simpler terms. So that's where like these misconceptions come in, because you like try to simplify this like kind of complex science at a certain level.
Yeah. But I think, and I in one hand, I like don't, as when you learn more about this stuff, you're like, oh, well, that's wrong, and we shouldn't be saying stuff like this. But as a framework, it kind of works okay. If we are telling runners, okay, so say, you have these runners who think that draining their legs or getting a massage or doing a cool down is flushing lactic acid, and that's why it's making them feel better. Well, that might be wrong, but those things are working somehow. It might not be working through the lactic acid mechanism that we're thinking, but like it is doing something. So like doing a cool down is good, and we kind of all know that. And doing the cool down makes you feel better. And no, it's not because it flushes out the lactic acid, but the fact that it makes us feel better, not that you should lie to runners and say it's the lactic acid, but it never hurt us to think that, right? I mean, we
Yeah.
did all these things to like prevent
It
lactic
worked.
acid, and yeah, right. It worked and it never hurt us. So like, as long as it's continuing to kind of like provide benefit, I think as a framework, like simplifying a lot of these concepts, it kind of makes sense. And I don't necessarily have an issue with it, sometimes.
Would there be an easier way that you would explain it that is a little bit more accurate? Like, how would you go about that if you had like a newbie runner who wasn't quite sure how to describe it?
Describe like the lactic acid kind of thing?
Yeah. Describe like what was going on.
Yeah. I mean, I just think, in terms of like why you're feeling, so say like sore for some reason, I think maybe just at least, so maybe we can think about it like that. But I guess explaining to that, I think the soreness thing is pretty easy to explain just in terms of like, okay, well, your muscles get sore because they're literally tearing. When we do eccentric exercises, which is like a stretching exercise versus a concentric, which would be shortening the muscle. So lengthening the muscle, which that happens when you run. It happens when you like lift a weight, anything like that. Anything where you're stretching the muscle, it's going to cause these little micro tears. And that's actually what causes the soreness, because you get this kind of inflammatory response in the muscle, buildup of all these different cytokines and things like that. So that's why we feel sore. So I think explaining it to somebody like that and being like, well, we think lactic acid is making you sore. That's associated with high intensity running. Well, what's also associated with high intensity running? More stretching of your muscles. So if you go out and do 100-meter sprints, like you're really, really causing a lot of damage to those muscles because you're sprinting fast, you're stretching that muscle. So that's going to cause more tears. You're going to be sore. So, I mean, really like in a concept like that, you can just tell them, oh, well, you're tearing your muscle during high intensity exercise. And like, sure, you probably built up lactate, but that's not what's causing the soreness. It's, that insanely fast sprints and running that you were doing,
Yeah. So I want to get into some other misconceptions. I think there are plenty of them within the running community. So the other one would be stretching after a run and stretching before a run. Why is it better for us to be more dynamic as opposed to like static stretching? What's going on?
Oh man, stretching is such a like controversial.
It's a hot button issue.
It's a hot button issue because I mean, I think that in terms of after, so we can talk about before and after, because I think stretching definitely has its place, and before and after it plays a different role. So if we think about it after, I do think that overall, as runners and as athletes, but you and I are runners and this is running podcast, so we'll speak of it in terms of running. You're going to get increased range of motion. You might prevent injuries. I think as far as like the research goes, it's very inconclusive. I mean, I'll read studies where people will stretch and they won't see maybe injury reduction or range of motion, and then some will show it. But I think overall, like, a stretching routine that's pretty integrative and has a lot of different kinds of stretching is going to prevent injuries. If you do it like after running or just as kind of a general maintenance routine, like during the week. So it doesn't even have to be directly after your run, but like sometime during the day. And it is a good way to cool down, get the blood flow, get the circulation after a run, and just kind of like end the workout and relax. So I think that plays a good role. As far as stretching before a run, I think the research is more conclusive on that in terms of static stretching at least being detrimental. And so you mentioned dynamic. So if we separate like static and dynamic would be more in terms of like plyometrics. So, doing the high knees, doing the butt kicks, doing some leg swings, basically anything that's sort of this ballistic motion with the muscle where we're moving it fast. So fast contraction, fast relaxation, getting that range of motion. So really just doing almost sort of like calisthenic type stuff. I guess I would consider that dynamic. And then static stretching would just be your typical, the people can't see what I'm doing, but just standing there stretching your arm or like doing a calf stretch or a quad stretch. I think as far as the static stretching goes, a lot of studies have shown that you will, during the subsequent workout, maybe have decreased power output, have decreased maybe, I don't want to say like firing of the muscle, but overall, I think performance will kind of decrease depending on kind of exercises you're doing. And the reason for that is basically because, when you're running, what you want is tendon stiffness and muscle stiffness, because the stiffer your muscle is, we're just springs, our legs are just springs, and so are our feet. And so we want stiff tendons, stiff springs in order to propel us, further and faster. And so if we think about, lengthening out those springs, it's not going to be as reactive. It's not going to be as, quick to rebound off of the ground. And so I think that's why the static stretching studies and have just shown not to be beneficial. And I even kind of see this in my own, I don't know how much stretching you do before runs and stuff, but I've cut static stretching largely out of my routine. I'll do some hip flexor stuff in areas that are consistently tight on me. I'll stretch those a little bit before a run. But mostly what I'll kind of do is some glute exercises, a little bit of foam rolling. But even that I'm a little bit weary of because of the same sort of things, like decreasing the tension. I don't necessarily want to decrease that too much.
I've moved out of, I don't do any static stretching at all. So pre-run, I have a nice dynamic routine. I'll do foam rolling, and then just there's a routine that Galen Rupp did, as much as I don't want to promote it, back in the day that I stole a lot from. That I always feel pretty warmed up from it. And then post run, I'll do more mobility type stuff as opposed to static stretching as well.
Yeah, for sure. I think, and I've even seen, we did this I remember doing this back in high school, sort of when kind of the dogma around stretching changed. So this would have been not that it changed right around then, but at least the dogma with my coaches kind of changed. And they started looking, my freshman, sophomore year, we would do, our 1 mile warm up, 2 mile warm up. And then we would sit for 30 minutes and do static stretching. Everything under the sun, we would go arms down all the way down to the toes, and we would stretch everything. So for one, by the time we were done with that, I needed another warm up because I was, we've been sitting for 30 minutes. So, what's the point of that? We would then start doing a second warm up. I'm like, well, this is a waste of time. And then secondly, we would be stretching so much, and honestly, you would just feel a little bit too loose after that. And then I remember my junior year, we started basically not doing that. So we would do our warm up, we would go straight into plyometrics and then hit the workout. And man, I felt, anecdotally, I felt so much better just in the workout. One, because you hadn't spent all that time just sitting on the ground, doing nothing. You kept your cardiovascular system warmed up, you kept your muscles warmed up, and then, you weren't doing all those lengthening stretches. So just in terms of my own experience, I've noticed that not stretching before runs has helped. I haven't experienced any more injuries because of it, anyways. I was rarely ever injured in high school or college when we did, no stretching. So I don't think that you're going to increase your injury risk necessarily if you don't stretch before a run. Again, if you have problem areas, stretch those. If something's really tight, obviously stretch it out. But in general, I think stretching outside of the running workout area is more important if you want to just increase your range of motion in general. So maybe integrate that into a strength routine or something like that. But the research on that, on the before run stretching is pretty conclusive, I think. And it's probably it doesn't boost performance. We'll just say that. It might not hurt it, but I don't think it will boost it anymore.
There's a study I read. I honestly forget. It's been a while now, but yeah, it's basically you're lengthening your muscles, so then when you're running, your body thinks that muscle is longer than it actually is, which leads to a lot of problems, which what you're saying basically. But it's always sticks with me when I
Yeah, for sure. I just think I don't know. Having a good range of motion is good if you want to prevent injuries, but I think flexibility is pretty overrated. I've known,
I think so.
I'm very flexible, super flexible, and I'm definitely not the best runner I know. Some of the best runners I know are the least flexible people. I have a friend who I ran with through in high school and in college, probably the least flexible, runner I've ever met. He couldn't even touch his toes, but he's also the most talented runner that I know. So, not that causation equals correlation, but I like to think about this in terms of he's not flexible, but what we just talked about, if, better tendon stiffness is going to boost running performance. So I look at it like that, and it really makes sense.
Yeah. Is there anything that you've learned through your research that you've directly used in your running that's helped a lot? Is there anything that was kind of an eye-opening moment?
Yeah, so I haven't done, primarily my research focus now, at least like what I actually am doing in research is kind of more geared towards, I won't say clinical populations, but sort of more from like a health perspective rather than a performance perspective.
Yeah.
But I do think, I'm trying to think of, maybe something that just looking, maybe not doing research in terms of like towards my PhD, but just research in general. Couple interesting things that I've come upon in the past few years when I've been writing articles, like blog posts and stuff, has been like the whole running cadence thing. I wrote an article around that a little while ago, and we have this kind of magic number. So when you think about running cadence, like what's the ideal running cadence? I'll just ask you.
160 to 180 is usually.
Yeah. So 160 to 180, and typically 180 is kind of cited as like the perfect number that we want to aim for, which is actually pretty damn fast. Like 180 is a quick cadence. I don't know. I mean, I have to really struggle if I want to hit 180. But when I was writing this article on it, I was doing the research and all these studies, like where this came from. And I think it was just a single study maybe by Jack Daniels, the legendary running coach, where he basically went to like a professional track meet, studied all of these track runners, or he might have watched a video, something like that. But basically, the world's elites
I think it's actually in his first book. He talks about it. He was watching, I forget what meet it was, but then he like get something in his head was like, I need to track all these.
And so he just counted all their steps, and like, the average came out to be 180. And so then it's like, oh, boom, that's the paradigm that we all have now is 180. And so, and obviously there's something to that, but I think, this has proliferated so much. And then when I was doing this research, it's like, no, that's, it might be good to aim for, I think 160 to 180 is great, but having that 180 as kind of a standard isn't necessarily that accurate. And, there's so much individual variability that, you want to go with what feels natural. I mean, if you're down at 150 and you're having like these really, really long strides, I realized that a lot of the studies are showing that a lower cadence, so a longer stride, may be associated with some more injuries just because you're, getting more force on each stride. And so if it's low,
more time on the ground.
Yeah, for sure. You kind of want to aim to increase it, but I don't think it can necessarily be too high. I mean, at some point you're going to lose a little bit of performance if your cadence is too quick, because you're just going to be like a lot of vertical motion versus horizontal. But I think if you do, watch some of the better runners, they're probably going to have a higher cadence. I think like David Rudisha, though, his is pretty low. I think his might be closer to that 160 range. I mean, if you watch his like world record race, that man, like his stride's really long. It's not necessarily.
It's kind of glides. He has that long, powerful stride.
Yes. And a lot of just very little vertical motion too. I mean, I'm sure if you put his head on sort of like a plane, it would like deviate very little from that. And that's like the most beautiful runners always have that kind of, forward, completely.
There's
forward
like, there
motion.
isn't that up and down motion. You're just kind of like stable, with something I noticed too.
Yeah, like Kipchoge. I mean, his head probably barely even moves when he's running. But yeah, so the running cadence thing was just interesting, and that's definitely something I've integrated though into my own routine, because in the past couple of years I've struggled with a lot of injuries, and I've done some gait analysis and worked with a physical therapist and things like that to actually increase my cadence a little bit, because I did some running on a treadmill, did a gait analysis, and she was kind of telling me that, my cadence was around maybe to like the mid to high 160s. And we kind of worked together and got that up to around like 172, 173. And I think that's definitely improved my performance a little bit, but something that I'm conscious of, which is kind of fun to play around with on runs when you're out there, just like altering your cadence, making sure gives you something to focus on rather than daydream. You're just trying to like count your steps and time yourself on your watch. It's pretty interesting.
Kind of fun. Kind of makes the run go by a little bit quicker too.
Yeah, for sure.
So when you talk, like, cadence kind of rolls into like another thing that we maybe overthink a little bit, and that is kind of like running shoes and like drop. Is there a perfect drop on a running shoe? That would be the next one I'd roll into.
Yeah, I don't think so. I think there's probably the perfect drop for you, not for you, for the general you, in terms of like, I think everybody, we're all built so differently, and our foot morphology is like so different that I think we all have different needs when it comes to running shoes. But I'm definitely all for the transition into not necessarily minimalist. I think we found the perfect balance right now where we are in terms of like running shoes, by no means. So I'm not a biomechanics expert, but as any runner, I'm pretty interested in just looking at like the shoes. But we definitely went from this huge, just like cushion, and then Born to Run came out. And then we all were like, barefoot running shoes is what we need. That's it. If you're not wearing toe shoes or running barefoot, you're like doing a disservice to God or something, because this is how we did sports.
Not running natural.
Exactly. And then now we kind of found this happy medium between like, oh, we're not wearing toe shoes. We're not wearing these huge, like 20 millimeter drop shoes, but we have these shoes that have a decent amount of cushion, but the drop is lower. And I think that, somewhere between, I don't know, maybe like a 2 and a 10. I mean, obviously, again, it's gonna depend on what type of runner you are, but something with a very low drop that's gonna let your foot feel the ground, I think is very beneficial, because I'm all for like, at least when I'm in a shoe running, I like to feel the ground a little bit, and I think our body likes that, because if you put so much padding between your foot and the ground that you're messing with your body's own proprioception, it can't even feel what it's landing on. I think that that will result in more injury than having not enough cushion will. What's interesting, so, I've read some studies, and they show that shoes with higher cushion actually can lead to greater impact forces on like the knees and on the ankles and things like that. And it might sound kind of counterintuitive, but when you think about it, it kind of makes sense, because what happens is you put that big foam between your foot, your sole, and the ground, and what your body does, since it can't really sense that as well, because you have so much of that cushion, it is actually going to apply a greater force, because it wants to get that feedback. So you're actually going to land harder to try to get that feedback, versus how you would in a minimalist shoe that sort of allows the sole of your foot to feel that ground. So I think the lower drop shoes allow you to do that. They allow you to get a little bit more feedback from the ground. And I don't really think we need, some people do, but in general, I don't think most people need as much cushion as we, once thought that we did. And I think a lot of people are realizing that, using the kind of the minimalist type shoes, or at least the shoes that aren't insanely built up with all these stabilization mechanisms built in.
I always like to, like, if you do like that shoe, at least like alternate off. Like, I love the Hoka Bondi. Like, it just feels nice sometimes. But I have also a couple of, like, I run in the Saucony Kinvara for like most of my runs. So it's nice to have that like balance.
Yeah, I ran in the Kinvara all throughout high school. I love that shoe. I transitioned a little bit more in college, just because like, I increased my mileage and things like that. And I did want something with a little more cushion. Yeah, it is. It's great for like tempos and stuff, and for like shorter runs. But I've started running in, and probably for the past like 5 or 6 years, I've been running in the Nike Pegasus, which I think is like a perfect kind of balance. The drop has decreased in the past couple of years. I think it's become more kind of like streamlined, but it does provide a lot of cushion. I feel like it holds up very well on runs. So I like that. And I'm not sure what the drop is. It's probably like 12 to 15, maybe. Might even be higher.
Yeah. I thought it was like 10 to 12 in that range, but that's been the nice thing with the Born to Run influence. Everyone's kind of like gone down, which is nice. So that you have that like nice cross section of, usually most shoes are going to be in that like 4 to 12 range. And it's like everyone, for the most part, can find a shoe that works for him. And that, like, I'm a big time Forefoot runner, so I always get a lower drop anyway, because it feels nicer.
Yeah, same. Yeah, it looks like it's a 10 millimeter drop. Actually, I just looked it up. I have Google right in front of me. But yeah, I think, I kind of transitioned to Forefoot running in some time around high school, like, because I was a pretty big heel striker. And it's funny that when you say that, it's like a insult, oh, you're a heel striker. But like, I transitioned to Forefoot running, and I definitely think you want less of a heel with that anyway, because it feels unnatural to Forefoot strike in something with such a huge heel.
That's why I've like never been able to run in, like, I've just always run on my forefoot. I'm just like kind of run on my toes anyway. So yeah, I've like never been able to run in something with like that big of a build up, because it almost feels like it's forcing you kind of back on your foot.
Yeah, exactly.
Is there any like actual knowledge to like running more up on your foot being a little more efficient? Is there any like actual data to that, or?
Yeah, I think as far as, again, this goes back to the individuality thing. I think, if you're a heel striker and that's how you've been running your whole life and you're most efficient like that, by all means, if it ain't broke, don't fix it, just like keep running like that. But I mean, I think there is an efficiency aspect or an efficiency bonus that comes with running on your forefoot. I mean, if you look at most of the elite runners, I mean, all of them are running on their forefoot. You don't see many races or many high level marathons where these guys are like going heel to toe. Really, yeah. I mean, they might not be running on their tippy toes, but they're at least landing on the ball of their foot and transitioning forward. So I definitely think, I can't cite any specific studies, but I mean, just in terms of thinking about efficiency and, what happens when you're running on your heel, you're essentially using it. It's like a braking force. And so that's going to automatically decrease your efficiency. I mean, landing on your heel kind of like stops your forward motion a little bit, and then you're going to roll up onto your foot. And, while that rolling motion is kind of natural, you are getting a little bit of the momentum loss when you're landing on your heel. So I definitely think from an efficiency standpoint, it's going to be more efficient to run on your forefoot. But I also think that if you took a forefoot runner like you or I and put them on a treadmill and had them run with their forefoot and then had them run heel striking, we would obviously be less efficient striking with our heel. But then if you took somebody who is a natural heel striker and then did that, I don't think you would see the same thing. They probably would be, at least for a while, less efficient running forefoot if they weren't used to that. So it definitely, has a little bit to do with what you're used to. I think learning to forefoot strike would probably be beneficial for a lot of people if they could kind of integrate that. I mean, I was probably inefficient at that when I was training myself to kind of run like that. I remember my calves being sore for like weeks because I was like basically just training to run on my toes. I mean, it's natural now, but like, man, I remember when I decided like, I'm going to go do like 400 meters at a time and run on my forefoot and then go back to my heel. And like, man, I was sore for, weeks during that. But after you transition and learn, teach your body to do that, I think it'll be more efficient.
Yeah, because it's one of those things that like I know us as coaches for the most part always like try to say is if you get up on your even more forward on your foot, it's more efficient in the long run. But I don't know how right that is necessarily. And like I always think back to, I had this college teammate who was an 800-meter runner. He was a mid-distance runner, 815, and like he was the hardest heel striker. You could like hear him around the turn if he was like behind you.
Just like
we were always like,
slapping
he sounded like a freight train coming through.
Yeah.
We were always trying to get him to like get up on his midfoot a little bit more, but he was also pretty fast. So it's like, how much do you want to change that if it's going to change the form? And he could never quite like get to the point where he was like a lighter foot strike. So, at some point it's just not efficient for a person.
Right. And heel striking in spikes is pretty painful. Like, I don't know how he did that.
Yeah, I don't know.
I mean,
I don't know how he did
spikes are built for forefoot striking, so I don't know, but good for him, I guess. It's very rare to see, but occasionally, I will see, like elite runners and even guys like that, like an 815 guy who are just running at these super fast speeds and like, they'll be running on their heel. I'm like, how are you that fast? I don't get it. But
yeah, he was like a 155 guy to D3 school running, just like sound like a Clydesdale coming around.
That's wild. He's not going to sneak up on you though, because you're always going to be able to hear him.
He's going to love that I brought him up.
Right.
Yeah, I mean, is there anything to like the perfect running form, or because like I always think of it as like finding the most efficient form of yourself. But like we were talking about with Kipchoge and Rudisha, like there is kind of a universal like form when you watch them run, as far as like the way they bound and the way that there isn't a lot of motion like with their torso and their upper body. Is there like anything to be said to that?
Yeah, I mean, I think if you looked at, some of the best, there are some of these commonalities that are definitely shared. I mean, as with anything, you're going to have your outliers like, oh, well, all these fastest guys run like this. Oh, but look at this guy. He doesn't run like this at all. So for instance, like, I think a good example would be comparing like Rudisha to Nigel Amos, who was second place in Beijing, I guess, where he set that record. I mean, man, that guy's form was awful. He was, flapping his arms like, he like heels out and like, I mean, so just very bad form, especially in that final straightaway. But so you're going to have some outliers whose form doesn't necessarily align with that. But I think, some of the if you just look at some of the guys, some of the common aspects, one would be the forefoot striking, obviously. A lot of them share that. I think the head motion, not a lot of excess head motion, either side to side or up and down, like we were talking about before. A lot of them, if it just looks like they're moving forward, it doesn't even look like, if you look at it from the side, they're not going to be bobbling up and down, getting a lot of that vertical motion, because basically, that's just wasted energy. I mean, you're going to move up and down a little bit, but the more you can minimize that vertical oscillation in your running form, the better. Just keep moving forward. And I think something that definitely plays into that, which might be one of the bigger things in terms of optimizing like efficiency as a runner, will be that forward lean. If you look at a lot of the runners, so I think a couple of the runners who have the best, Kipchoge has a great forward lean when he's running. And also who I love to watch is like Gebre Selassie, some of his old video or some of his old videos. And then Bekele, who almost looks like he's like at an angle to the ground when he's running, so a forward angle to the ground, which is kind of like insane. I mean, I don't think I lean that far when I run. Definitely. I think I'm kind of more, backward, back erect kind of posture. But I think learning to lean a little bit is definitely, if you look at a lot of the quickest runners, a lot of them have that forward lean. And how that's going to help you is basically you just want to be in an extended fall towards the ground, but not actually fall forward. You want to kind of feel like you're falling, because that's basically just going to carry your momentum forward versus, either leaning back or just being straight up. So I think that's something a lot of the top level, high level runners share as well, is that forward lean.
Do you think that's a teachable thing, or do you think it's more just like natural?
No, I definitely think I think it's definitely teachable. I think a lot of runners will, at least a lot of sprinter coaches, I've seen some guys when they're getting coached and they'll kind of work on that lean with sprint coaches. I think it's more important in sprinting, but maybe not if you think about it, because, distance running, it's compounding through the whole thing. Whereas a sprint, you're out there for maybe 30 seconds to 45 seconds. But when you see sprinters doing those, the exercises with like the resistance band, so like the coach is holding the band, say, and they're like running, I think that's for cadence, for one, because they kind of work on that quick cadence, but two, it's teaching you to get that quick cadence while you're leaning forward. But I think it's something that can be taught for distance runners as well. Like, it's something that I've worked on. It's really hard because you have to focus on it, but like, looking down towards the ground maybe as you run, or just kind of like trying to get a little bit of tilt at your hips. You don't want to bend over. I think that's a misconception a lot of people have. So they're just like, oh, if you want to forward lean, they're just going to like hunch their back, which is not what you want. That's the opposite. You want to lean at the hips, not at like your back. I think that Prefontaine actually had a good forward lean too. And it's in one of the movies. I always mix them up because there's so many like pre-movies, but in one of them, I think it's like Bowerman's trying to teach Pre to like tilt at the hips, and he like makes some like sexual innuendo to try to get him to lean with his hips when he's running.
That's in Pre. That's in Pre, not
okay,
Without
it's
Limits.
In Pre. Gotcha. Yeah. So if anybody wants to go and watch that scene, it's probably on YouTube. But yeah, he's like telling him to lean at his hips and tilt his hips to kind of increase his efficiency, because he was running like upright. He was running almost like perpendicular to the ground, and he wanted to get him more to lean forward. So we have that, the forefoot striking, the head, and then I think arms as well. If we're looking at the running form, not a lot of cross body motion. That's something that I've tried to work on as well with my own form, because I'm awful in terms of letting my arms cross over my midline. That's something that I've been working on like my entire running career, but it's hard because it's very subconscious. Like you can think about it, but then once your mind goes off of having your arms go in a forward direction, it's like they just start to go back to their natural motion. But, you want to minimize the amount of time your arms are going across your body, because that's just wasted side to side motion, up and down, like hips to ear kind of motion is a lot. If you watch, again, the same guys I keep citing, but like Rudisha, Bekele, things like that, their arms are just going straight up and down, hips to their ears. So I think that's definitely another thing that improves efficiency as well. I mean, really anything that just contributes to forward congruent motion versus side to side and up and down, all those things, just minimize wasted motion.
It's good to know. Yeah. And I think like those sprinter drills, I think they're more universal than we give them credit for sometimes. I think we like to think of it as like, oh, that's only going to work in the short term. But if you look at all the good runners, like they're form is kind of similar to sprinters if you break it down.
Yeah. I was just going to mention that you're totally right. Like, I think, a distance runner at the more that you can make your form look like a sprinter, the better, because they're most of them at least are very efficient.
Yeah, I mean, if you think about it, like they're training to run that short period of time like the most efficient as possible. So we can learn a little bit from that.
Yeah, for sure.
So I want to talk a little bit about like your work with sleep and like how that benefits us just in our daily life and in our performance. Have you been able to find like a correlation between like performance and sleep over a training schedule, or is your research like not that macro in terms of?
Yeah, so my research is more, we're focused basically on just general cardiovascular and blood vessel health. So we don't look a lot at performance things, but I think
You can
all these
infer a little bit from that. Yeah.
Yeah, you can apply. I mean, all these concepts sort of, when you zoom out, it's going to apply. So if I just take, I'll take maybe the concepts from my research and then just we can apply it to a general athletic or running perspective. So what some of my research is showing, and a lot of the other literature shows, I mean, a lot, most of what we do has kind of been shown before a little bit, but if you lose sleep, some of ours is like total sleep deprivation, which is just like a 1 day without sleep. So 24 hours, basically, if you think of like pulling an all-nighter,
you're studying for your organic chemistry test, then you got practice the next morning.
Yeah, exactly. So either that, or even like, sleep restriction, where it's kind of maybe a more generalizable thing that most people will do. So they'll go like, a week with like 4 to 5 hours of sleep per night. A lot of what that research shows, just from a cardiovascular perspective, is that blood vessel function decreases, blood pressure increases, a lot of other things associated with cardiovascular health. So like autonomic, like sympathetic nervous system activity is going to go up. So you're kind of getting like a stress response. But in terms of my research, we're showing that blood vessel function is reduced. And so just from a simple performance perspective, whether you're thinking about cognitive performance or physiological performance, like what do you need to do to perform well? Well, your blood vessels need to work because they got to get blood to everywhere else in your body. They got to get blood to your brain, they got to get blood to your muscles as well. So whether you're, a 18-year-old athlete or a 60-year-old athlete, like you need to get blood to your muscles while you exercise. And if that's impaired because you're not sleeping enough, you're going to perform worse, whether that's, or you might have the same performance, but you might, have to work harder for it because your body's basically, it's not responding like it should. And, you don't really need studies like mine to show that, because there are studies that directly will show that sleep loss decreases performance. My research isn't necessarily focused on that, but there are plenty of sports scientists who are doing, lose this amount of sleep or deprive them of sleep, and performance suffers the next day. So, and things like that, we don't even need studies for. You just know, like, obviously if I don't sleep well, I'm not going to perform as well. But oddly enough, like, I've had times where I haven't slept very well and I've like performed great. So obviously, there are some exceptions to that, but I think consistent sleep in general is the best thing, because one night of sleep loss it might be detrimental to the next day performance, but you can always make that up. So in the long run, it's okay. But, for runners, if you're involved in this strenuous training cycle, like your body needs sleep. I mean, just from a recovery standpoint, you obviously want to feel good for your workouts, but, you're not going to recover if you're not getting enough sleep. I mean, it's probably the top, performance enhancing measure that you can take in terms of boosting your performance. And at least if you're not getting enough, if you're getting the adequate amount of sleep, I'm not necessarily convinced that adding more sleep will be better. I mean, I think sleep extension in some cases will improve performance, and some studies may have shown that, like adding a nap. So if you're getting 8 hours of sleep a night and doing another 2-hour nap, that might boost performance. But I do think there's a limit to like how much we can sleep or how much we want to sleep. So I think that 7 to 9 hours is like the sweet spot. But, if athletes are wanting to, optimize their adaptations and, are really involved in training, then, getting that proper amount of sleep is just necessary, both, for your neuromuscular system, for the cardiovascular system, and then just to, replenish, whether it's, glycogen or, anything you need to run. I mean, sleep is just so important. I think, it's a very hot research topic. It always has been, but even now more so, I think we're realizing like what a lack of sleep can really do to impair performance. It's pretty cool stuff.
Yeah, I think it's interesting to have that. So if you're a college coach, you can approach your athletes and be like, "Hey, here."
Mm-hmm. Yeah, for sure. I mean, even some of the research is pretty astounding, just from like how much cardiovascular health can suffer from a lack of sleep. I mean, and it's just very interesting too, because we've always, at least a lot of people, we think of sleep more just in terms of like brain, we need sleep because our brain gets tired and like we need to restore our brain function for the next day. And sure, that is one thing that plays into it, but it's like, man, there's so many more. I mean, everything in our body is, recovered through sleep and like needs sleep to function properly. A very interesting like area that I'm, again, no expert in, but that's, kind of something that I've been reading about and looking into is like the circadian rhythms in our circadian rhythm system, which is basically like your internal clocks. So, our body is kind of on this schedule, obviously, with the light dark. We're kind of synchronized to that. We go to bed, well, at least evolutionarily, we would go to bed when it got dark and we would wake up when the sun came up. And that's kind of how our body is wired to work. Our functions are optimized to that. So in the morning, when the sun comes up, that's when, everything starts to kind of ramp up. We get the cortisol spike, we get, our blood pressure increases, and that's like to prepare us for the day, which like makes sense. Yeah. So, and then at night, all those kind of things wind down. And so, thinking from an athletic perspective and for runners, I think it's important to realize like, well, I think as runners, we all know that intrinsically we kind of have this intuition about our circadian rhythms, because like, oh, well, do you like working out in the morning or at night? Like, I think that plays into like your chronotype, whether you're like a morning person or an evening person, whether you like to work out in the morning or at night. But also, if we want to look at performance and why sleep is so important, getting the proper amount of sleep at the right time for you, again, there's not really one prescription for sleep for everyone. I think in general, we can say 7 to 9 hours and like try to go to bed close to sundown and like wake up with the sun in general. But I mean, there are differences, like genetic differences in your preferences towards sleep and how much sleep you need. So that definitely needs to be acknowledged. But getting, that right 7 to 9 hours at the right time is going to keep those circadian rhythms synchronized. So if you're looking at it from a performance perspective, if you have a race the next morning or something like that, you want to keep your sleep schedule consistent because, you've been training, say at 8 to 10 in the morning. You want to keep your performance, parameters that are optimized at that morning time on this circadian schedule. And so messing with your sleep schedule for a couple days before, a week before, even the night before could kind of mess that up. And you're going to like, not perform as optimally as you might.
I always remember when Jerry Schumacher was at Wisconsin, there's a year that like the NCAAs were, I think they were on either the East Coast or the West Coast, and the time zone was like way different. And he like moved practice like later in the day so that they would like practice at the time that NCAAs would be at. Like I remember being really good that year. So that's always what sticks in my head.
Yeah, that's so interesting. And it's like, and that plays such a huge role. Like when the Olympics come around and all the athletes, I'm sure that they have on staff, people who are specialized in this, so they can kind of like, months out start like working on, training them to not experience like this jet lag, because it's super interesting. I mean, our bodies are just so complex.
Plus hours ahead. Yeah.
Yeah. Like, I mean, I think it was in where was like the most recent, maybe the World Championships or something, but it was like completely reversed. So like, they're racing at noon, the marathon, but it's like midnight. So your body thinks it's midnight. I mean, there's no way you're going to run at your best if, it might be noon in whatever, Tokyo where you're at, but it's midnight to your body. And so there's no way you're going to, perform at your best. And so you need people to really think about these, we got to start these jet lag protocols like 1 month out. We're going to start, you might have to start working out at midnight. And then, there are other things that you can do to kind of entrain your rhythms, like food and exercise and light exposure can all kind of train your circadian rhythms to, act on this other schedule, which is really interesting. So I'm sure athletes use things like that. It's not something I've looked into, but I would be, I think that would be cool to work with athletes in that respect.
It's like super fascinating to me.
Yeah, it is. I'm sure, people probably get paid the big bucks for that too, because it could be the difference between, a fourth place and a gold, really, if you think about it.
Well, I was thinking about like just anecdotally, like I always work out so much better like in the afternoon versus the morning. Like always in college, I had to move my like big workouts from the morning to the afternoon just because I like
Oh,
can't
wow.
run as fast. Like I don't know. When I first wake up, it takes my body like a long time to get going.
Yeah, I'm the
So
opposite. That's
like
funny.
yeah, just
I'm a
all
morning workout person. Honestly, I think it's more from a I will admit, so this is kind of an interesting area too. Like I prefer working out in the morning, but I do think that I run better in the afternoon, but I don't prefer it just because it's logistically harder. So, if I work out at 4 p.m., that means I have to think about eating, one, maybe two meals, like what I'm
yeah.
putting in my body that I don't jack up my stomach for the workout. I have all day, whether you're at work or going to class, that's going to kind of like play into my mental and my physical stress. And then it's just like, it's nice to have the run done sometimes and you don't have to worry about it. So for me, that's why I like doing it in the morning. But, as a lot of runners who work out twice a day know, sometimes you don't have that option. So if I'm doing a morning and an afternoon workout, I got to do both. So it doesn't really matter. But in terms of a power output perspective and like an actual performance perspective, I think we're all better in the afternoon. And that's just from a purely like going back to the circadian rhythms, like that's just how our bodies are optimized. Like multiple studies have shown that power output peaks in the early afternoon. Everything's probably going to be better there. And I've definitely experienced, similar to you, that myself. Like if I do a tempo run or something in the morning versus the afternoon, I mean, it's going to be better in the afternoon probably. And, I might not like doing it then as much, but I'll definitely run better. At least, the effort will be less then for sure.
Sometimes it's just like a mental boost, like actually be able to hit it. Yeah. Well, cool,
Yeah,
Brady.
definitely.
Well, want to give you a chance if you want to pump up your newsletter and things you've been working on currently. Where can people find you?
I appreciate it. Yeah. So I do a weekly newsletter. It's called Physiology Friday. If people want to sign up for that, I can always send you the links. Yeah. It's just a short, what I do is basically it's like an interesting study I find during the week. I'll break it down kind of, not do any long form type of post about it, but just some like the methods, the results, something I just find interesting that I think other people will enjoy. So I send that out every Friday. People can sign up for that if you want to put like a link in the show notes or something like that. And then I also have my own podcast. If you don't mind me plugging that, it's called Science and Chill.
Plug away.
It's called Science and Chill. You can get it on, I think, every major podcast platform. I have it on Podbean, iTunes, Spotify now. Hopefully Amazon apparently is coming out with like a podcast service. So it'll be on there whenever that comes out. If people want to subscribe to that, I speak to many different people. It's primarily a science and physiology and biology based podcast, but I've had ultramarathon running coaches on there to talk about nutrition. So I talk about running a lot. We talk about sleep. We talk about anything that you can think of. I have a lot of guests lined up and a lot kind of a podcast in the works right now. So it's been great. But if people want to check that out, I'd really appreciate it. And yeah, I mean, that's about it. I'm also working on, if anybody be interested, I'm working on a review actually to hopefully publish in a scientific journal soon. I don't know when it will be published, but that's kind of something else I've been working on. So, yeah, a lot going on.
A lot of things in the fire. Yeah.
Yes, for sure.
I appreciate it. Thanks for coming on. I appreciate you talking science with me. It always is fascinating. So
yeah, Justin, it was great. I appreciate you having me on to bust some misconceptions.
Hello everyone, it's me again. Thank you so much for sticking to the end of this video. If you liked my interview with Brady Holmer, make sure that you subscribe and like the video. Hey, if you're on a little bit of a binge and need some more things to watch, here's one of my other videos. Here's something that the algorithm wants you to watch, and I'll see you guys later.